How's it going, guys? This is Evan at Underhill Bonsai, and we're doing part 4 of our bonsai educational series. So this would be Bonsai 104, or I would consider this video in particular to be more of a 2.0 whatever, like 200 level class as far as bonsai education goes, because today I'm going to be talking about winter care and going through a tree like this and doing preparations for winter and defoliating, taking off all the old foliage, cleaning up the branches, and talking about what's happening this time of year with our bonsai as they go into this fall season. Quite a few things to talk about on this video, but before I get there, I do want to address some questions that were shot towards the soil episode that we did on the previous video. And I knew it was going to bring up some controversies and some questions, and I did that on purpose. That's just the way I am. If you listen to my podcast show, Little Things for Bonsai People, I say quite a few things like that as well. But it's not to stir anybody up or anything. It's just to kind of get the conversation so we can talk more and more about bonsai in this way. I know that akadama is a really touchy topic for a lot of people when it comes to bonsai soils. And I do have to make a mention too that there was a misquote on the previous video about oxen that I want to go clear up really quick. I said that oxen was a micronutrient. It's actually a chemical. It was just a word there that I switched out. I apologize if anybody was confused by that. It was released on a reel that we did on social media posts later on, but that's just something I misquoted. You guys have to keep in mind, there's no prompt in front of me. I don't script this. So this is just straight from my brain to you. So sometimes things get jumbled. Oxen is a chemical during the process of when they go to the tips and then respond and go back down to the roots. But we're past that information on that video, so I just wanted to clear that up really quick. So I had a question come in. It was on one of our social media posts. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm under the impression that inorganic soils like akadama, pumice, etc. do indeed break down with root growth as well in freezing temperatures. If that were the case, that inorganic soils don't break down, we wouldn't have nearly as much loss of water penetration as the respective tree grows throughout the years. I see where this question is going, and I know what the concern is there. Yes, akadama does break down. Organic materials break down, get absorbed and eaten by the tree and wash out of the bottom of the pot. Whenever I was saying that the soil is permanent and that it doesn't break down, what I was referring to is that it doesn't break down to like a completely like tiny metabolical size and then just get absorbed by the tree or washed out the bottom. Permanent soils in that instance when I was referring to them was that I was telling you guys the soil will stay, and it will stay for as long as the tree keeps it, and when you go to repot and you're not washing anything out or you're not bare rooting, that's a permanent soil will be there the tree's entire life. Whereas this, yes, akadama and pumice will break apart. I wasn't telling you guys that it was impenetrable like some kind of unknown metal that we wouldn't know of. It is a particle. It is a small stone. In fact, there's a little bit of pumice here. Yes, I can break it with my hands depending on the piece of particle that I get. I wasn't trying to tell you guys that they wouldn't break. See, there's a piece break in there. Akadama is number 1 in breaking down. Is it best to not let the tree sit in water over winter? So that's in reference to bald cypresses sitting in water over winter, because my previous video featured a very large bald cypress in a traditional kind of just formal upright style, and this one is a flat top style. And so that's just talking about bald cypresses in general. So this is more of a deeper bald cypress thing that I'm just going to give to you lightly, because I've got episodes on my podcast show that we've talked lengths about this and why full water submersion of the root system is even necessary on bald cypress bonsai, depending on their stage of development. So that's a rabbit hole I don't know if we want to go down right now. But when it comes to winter, I don't put my trees in water during the winter, because if the temperatures get low enough, the water could freeze on the top, and that could also kill roots. So I'm not interested in losing my surface roots, so I tend to take them out. Also, during the drier seasons here in Louisiana, in the wintertime, water will be less likely to be present in the winter around their root systems like that. And lack of water is also another thing that triggers leaf loss. Like this tree is probably got a mixture of that, where because it's in a shallow container, it's new to this container. We're not going to submerge it in water during the winter to try to catch it up or anything. It needs to go dormant. Does wound seal inhibit healing? This was a question I saw that was in a social media post that was very interesting. That there's an argument right now that there's all these wound sealants on the market that have been on the market for several decades for bonsai, And some people are kind of seeing now some species don't need wound sealants. I would still use them on stuff like azaleas, Japanese maples, or any other softer wooded species. Now, a bald cypress or an elm tree or a trident maple, a lot of people told me that they stopped using wound seals on those. I use wound seals on a lot of trees just because of the size of the wound. I want to keep it cleaner and I want to keep it moisture protected longer because it's so humid here in Louisiana that if I want to prevent rot, I'd need to seal the wounds. In fact, this tree here had wound sealant here, 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 and here so that it didn't rot the core of this tree out to keep the structural integrity of this tree sound. And we'll go over that in just a moment, what I'm talking about there with the wounds healing. But do you have to use wound sealant? The answer is yes and no. Just know the species you're working with and know the climate that you're working in. Does akadama tend to break down quickly in certain environments like areas with heavy rainfall? That's another akadama question. There's a whole thing about akadama, in my opinion, that is a back and forth. It's kind of like a scare on some people's parts where they're like, it's expensive, is it worth it? Do I want to use akadama because down here in Louisiana, just one of the things I've heard, a common thing from a lot of experienced bonsai people here, is that there's too much water here. We water too often to warrant using akadama because it turns into a slurry. And I will challenge them to say that your watering habits might be a little off, or the grade of akadama that you purchased and put in your soil might have been a little off as well. It might not have been high fired or as quality as you need to keep it and sustain it before it turned into a slurry. If it does turn into that, what you're calling a slurry, or if it breaks down too fast, it's actually what needs to happen to encapsulate the roots and become a root cake, is what I kind of call it. That's not the official name for it, but when the root ball is encrusted with akadama and it looks like it's impenetrable, but if you water it and you hydrate it, it does indeed penetrate the root ball. So with environments, will it break down? Yes. Cold will break down akadama. Lots of watering will break down akadama. Sudden temperature changes. I mean, this is how like molecules and stuff work. I mean, that's the separation and expansion and contraction of water and freezing. So the answer is yes, but we need to think about application before we get too concerned about why it breaks down so fast. So these are all good questions. They're just like, there's a lot more expansion to these questions than I think is necessary for something like this. But I know there's a lot more to be said about soils. We can do a larger scale soil conversation. In fact, I'm going to have some bonsai professionals from outside of my area come in for our show in March, and there's some conversations to be had on this channel as well about soils that they can also put their input in on as well. So without further ado, let's get into this tree. And so like I said before, this is going to be about fall. And so instead of concentrating on a conifer right now, we're going to look at a deciduous conifer. And so I still count bald cypresses as deciduous, but I grow them partially as a conifer, like when it comes to training and trimming. And then the flat top style is kind of its own thing. So since you guys liked the big tree on the previous video, I figured I would show you guys a flat top that we had developed here at the nursery. So I'm going to give it a spin around so you guys can see. And do know that I am very much aware of the inverse taper. If you want to call me up for it, go ahead. But I know that there's inverse right there. But that's the way the tree healed, and that's the best what we can do with it. So, but it's front that I chose, which is going to be right back here to the front of the container. The inverse taper disappears because of the way I chose to show the tree. Don't be worried about inverse taper in trees if the style of the tree dictates the height, the way the tree looks, the way the tree presents. This kind of goes back to the wound healing cut paste thing. So we can get a zoom in on this part of the tree right here. I wanted to show you guys where this tree is healed. So it starts here, and then the wound actually goes all the way up into here, and that's where the tree was actually carved out in the past. And we've actually been able to heal this wound completely and rolled over. So that access roll right there is what bald cypresses do whenever they heal over. The exterior of this, you can kind of see it a little bit, that black kind of stuff on there. It's kind of, okay, so there's a little bit of it left there. So that was the wound sealant that was on there like 4 or 5 years ago. I think it would be five years at this point, that pushed out of the tree. So it doesn't matter. It doesn't inhibit the rolling process on this. It's just over time I've had to go through, and I've had to use a tool like this, and I've had to go in and kind of like pick. Now that's just leftover old bark that's grown over it and under it. So I've had to pick it out with a tool like this, like the mechanics pick. Like I've told you guys in the past, this is an invaluable tool, and they're like $5 for a pack of them at the hardware store. So this was the next wound that was chopped here. And so this tree actually had 2 trunks, big massive trunks. So this trunk here coming out the top, was here before I started the work, and then there was another trunk that was a similar size, was coming out like this. This was cut off roughly about 2 years ago, I think. It's really hard for me to tell nowadays because I've worked on so many of these trees and I've had so many different things that I've made adjustments on and made quick adjustments as far as like cutting trees and then leaving them alone for a long time. So I left this alone to its own devices and then let the top run, and then it healed over time. So this is the next part of the tree. There was another large branch that came out towards the camera where you guys are seeing it, and that was also left to be, I cut it, I carved it with carving tools, and then I grew that next section of the trunk up here, and that was allowed to run, and that got a very nice thickness to it, and that in turn finished healing this, and then healed all the stuff that was back down on the same vein going down the trunk here. So just something so you guys can see how that was developed, and also these big bumps, these inverse taper bumps, why I leave them on a flat top cypress is if you see this deadwood feature down here, see how that deadwood is starting to creep up? This is a cambium rolling back from the trunk. It's trying to consume this piece of deadwood. So bald cypresses do this in nature, and whenever they get to that point where it's gone, it will look like a giant bump on the tree. So old bald cypresses actually look like this. So this tree, I guess you could say, is a hyper-realistic version of flat-top bald cypress. Coming back and looking at the root system, just real quick, this is the time of year whenever I know that this tree is not going to be doing a lot of stuff on the top. So I will go in and I will make adjustments. Like down here, I need to go in and just take, this is a really nice, like just steel brush that I got from the hardware store, like another $2 item. You don't have to spend a lot of money on bonsai tools, only on the metal shears and your knob cutters and your branch cutters and stuff. But when it comes to stuff that's cleaning up like this, it's pretty simple. But yeah, I like to use this tool, go in during the winter and clean this up because watering during the summer, I tend to get a lot of moss and muck grow on my surface roots. And so I just want to come in and check in and see what's going on with my roots. Another thing too is that it's okay if it gets a little mucky down here because this protects the roots in some instances and also keeps the moisture high on them. So actually any fibrous roots that are growing around these roots will develop, and further, like there's one right there. There's a fibrous root that turned into an actual nice surface root right here. It'll probably pick up on the camera. We'll do a zoom up of the Nabari after to kind of show you guys what that looks like. But I like to go in here and give it a quick cleanup just so I can see what's been going on. The back is obviously not as awesome as the front. Also, the soil has been mounded kind of high because this is this tree's first experience in a bonsai container. It's been in a training pot its entire life, and its first time ever being in a shallow pot is this year. So we're being easy on it, giving it some extra soil. We're not trying to go super duper shallow, even though this pot is not the shallowest container I could find, but it still looks very shallow for this tree because it's so tall. So yeah, just kind of going in, doing a checkup, peeling off this thick, chunky stuff, looking for issues in the roots so I can make note that if I want to repot this tree in the future, maybe tag things or correct things as I go. But this Nabari, which is surface root in terminology for bonsai, the Nabari on this tree is gorgeous. This is actually very nice. It's came along very well. We just had this one that's a little bulbous and a little big over here, but I really don't care because it's also got this really cool deadwood feature inside of it that's developing nicely. That's one thing that bald cypress do, is when they heal wounds and they start channeling their veins, they get a very nice looking surface root. And all these wounds in here, their old scars, are making bumps and interesting sections. So I'll go through and lightly brush. I don't like stripping my bald cypress. This is something that a lot of people ask me about bald cypresses is, do you go in and strip all the bark off? This one's had the bark stripped off in the past, like that stringy, long-stranded piece of bark that you would see growing on them. And then underneath, this new layer of bark I'm not going to touch is that flaky, smaller bark. It actually has a really nice look to it. This tree's been outside. Of course, it's outside all year, but it was outside before this recording, so it's still wet. It's been raining a lot today, so as it dries, you can actually see as we record this, a lot of the detail is starting to show up. And so like the spots where the bark is a little bit heavier, it's still pretty damp right there from that wound. Yeah, I go in and I check those things. I check my deadwood. So this deadwood piece needs to be cleaned and then lime sulfured this year. There's a couple of other deadwood sections on here, but they're very, very minor. Like there's a small shard of deadwood coming off this branch, just flew off of there because it was punky and old, so there was no chance of it sticking around. So it's just the way that bald cypresses are in the south. Deadwood will tend to rot away. Let's go ahead and help the tree shut down, and we'll talk about why trees shut down for the winter as I strip the leaves on this. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to start taking off all the leaves on this. So the tree's done most of this for me already because it's going dormant. So you can even see me hitting the tree. Things are kind of falling out of it. All bald cypresses in bonsai, this is one thing that I've learned, especially working with so many of them at the nursery, is that they're all genetically different. And the fall and the leaf drop on all of them comes at different times of the year. And I don't know why that is. It's just the way this species is. I've talked to my buddy Mike Lane down in Florida about bald cypress fall color, and it's the same down there in South Florida too. Some of them drop their leaves and change colors, and some of them don't, and then they hold on to the leaves and just go brown and ugly, and all the leaves just suddenly fall off. It could be a strength thing. It could be a soil content or water content thing, depending on where the tree's located. But they're generally easy to strip their leaves. Just like defoliating any deciduous tree, I tend to just take my hand onto a branch and then kind of slide it down. And I don't have fear of damaging any future buds on these trees because all of their buds, they're on this one piece right here, this little orangey piece. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And it gets to the top here and it's like 20 of them bundled right here at the tip. And they're really close on bald cypresses. And then here's something really quick before we get too far. That's a basket weaver bug. That is not a seed pod. That's actually a bug that's sucking the sap. I usually just flick those guys off and step on them or whatever. He's probably dead because we do spray occasionally for insecticides. But if you ever see him, here's another one right here. They're very, very common on bald cypresses, so just flick them off. So like we said before, I'm going to be applying a little bit of gin seal onto this piece of deadwood. On bald cypresses, I don't tend to go in and do a hyper, like clean look to the deadwood pieces because in the swamps, they tend to be a little more grayish colored and less like a alpine juniper bone white. So I'm gonna paint this lime sulfur onto this deadwood piece here to try to preserve it longer. But I think it's gonna fall off in the future. See, parts of this are kind of still damp under there. So this lime sulfur is going to act like as a wood preservative and then also lighten the color of the wood. So you guys will see as we work on this tree through the video that will turn from that yellowish color to a bone white. It'll just turn solid white. See, it's already starting to turn a little bit there. So we'll let that dry. So this is the tree after going in and taking off the leaves. There's still little tiny pieces of the fronds on here from the, they got these little tiny leaves that pop out. There's still a few basket weavers hanging out in here that I'll pick off as I go. Man, there was probably about 10 of them on this tree. But yeah, now that I've cleaned it up, now I can see my branch structure again. And a lot of people have asked me on the previous videos whenever I'm developing flat top bald cypress designs, what comes next. So I know I did a couple of carving things, and I will bring you guys out as a little bit of lanyap, is what we call it in here in Louisiana, a little bit extra to go outside and look at a previous bonsai design that I did to kind of show you what the next step was. This one was developed at the same rate as the other trees that are on the previous videos on my channel. So there's trees where I've carved and wired and then set them up, and then you guys are like, where's the next part of this video going? Like, what does the tree look like after? This is after 3 years of training to look like this. So this is 3 years after I cut this off, I cut that off, I grew it out, and then I went and wired it. And then after I wired it out, it grew into the structure you see here. The next year, I got the secondary branching, all these tiny, what we call secondary or refinement or bifurcation. There's a lot of different words, a lot of fancy words that people like to throw around. But I just segmented the branches, and then it happened again. And at year 3, this is what we have. And we have a pretty decent looking tree. And what I need to do now that it's dormant is go in, and this is the time to prune back, to prune back twigs. So that's another thing. So since this is a little bit more of an advanced topic, but we're still concentrating on the fall season here and going into winter, we prune twigs. So scissor work for fall, and then springtime is your heavier pruning work on deciduous trees. So that basically means that all this little fine twigging is going to get pruned now, and then in the spring when this tree is starting to push buds, if I need to make any corrections, like if I for some reason needed to cut this branch here, which I'm not going to because I love the line in this branch, it looks really nice. That would be carried at that time of year in the early spring. When the buds start to pop up, I would cut with a branch cutter or a saw. Probably be better off with a small hand saw to execute that. So I'm going to get my pruning shears. Joshua Roth all-purpose pruning shears. We do sell these in our nursery. So if you guys want to swing on over to underhillbonsai.com, and there's the store, underhillbonsaistore.com, you guys can pick up your own pair of Joshua Roth pruning shears. You want a nice, really nice, sharp pair of shears to carry out this process. Check and see if that's alive. There were some stubs on here that didn't look too happy. That one's fine. It's just not twiggy. It's just the base of the branch. So yeah, you need a really, really sharp pair of pruning shears to carry this out, because all your cuts should be not super visible like that there. I left that white bark under there. So that's the tissue underneath. That should be nice and, well, that didn't cut the best that I wanted it to, but that should be a nice flat cut. So when it heals, and the wound will be able to heal not from a frayed cut, but a surgically sharp cut. So living tissue heals better that way. So every one of these little knobs, I need to go in here and make corrections. I need to shorten some pieces up. I'm not super into needing to wire this tree. There are some sections that I could go and throw some wire on, but I think it's fine. I think this tree has kind of gotten to a point, especially in the flat top bald cypress style, that we're going to do a little bit more of a hyper naturalistic style, and even go as far as just do cut and grow style from this point on. And I've got some dead pieces. Like this is a nice little dead piece here. I say nice because this tends to happen in nature. I'll leave that on there as a snag. And nope, that's actually alive. But it does come out at an odd angle. So I'm just going to nub it back, and I might take my knife and kind of gin that up a little bit because it's at an odd angle. But what I'm really looking for here is to clean up all of my branches that I had on here before. I'm taking out, look at that right there. That's really lovely the way that drops down. But I'm taking out pieces that interfere with pads. So for instance, like the base of this branch, it comes out, and I've got actually 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces coming out of here, and people would argue in bonsai that this is bad. This will create a swell, and it sort of is, but the way that this tree is trained, we're not overly fertilizing. If you want to refer back to the fertilizer video on information on how that works, I'm not over fertilizing this, so I'm not super worried about this swelling up. In the case that it does, then it's flat top bald cypress style. I will actually go in and remove heavy sections of branches and not feel bad about it and regrow, because I'm trying to imitate nature in that respect. And that's how you get these interesting curves and cuts and little wounds on the branches. So what I'm looking for is where the intersections start to come out. So this one's a little crazy here. That's kind of a bad example, I'm gonna be honest. But it's my twisted survivor branch is what I call this lower branch. It's the last branch that would have stayed on the tree that didn't get destroyed and fell off. And this is what would be left over of the earlier version of that branch. So I'm just coming up, forks off here, it forks off here, it forks off here, and so on. So we're getting smaller and smaller internodes. So I'm chasing back those internodes to make sure that they maintain that proper distance, because if I don't compress it, then my internodes will keep getting longer and longer, and then I'll lose track of the frame and the silhouette of my tree, and then I won't have a believable small tree anymore. I'll just have a ever-growing bush-looking thing that doesn't really have mature branching on it. So I have to bring it in, like that's just too long. I'm just cut it off. I don't like the distance. I would rather this be a little bit more dominant in the structure, and actually that's too long too. And I will go in and shorten things up after I've kind of shortened up other sections of the tree after the fact to match the distance that I need. So I just wanted to get a little ahead on the trimming here, since this could be pretty tedious going through and picking every single branch. But I did want to show y'all this branch in particular. Turn it to the side a little bit more. So for a better explanation of the way we build branch structure on mature trees, we start here, we have some nice movement, and then the branch splits here. And then as we get further down, it splits here again, and then it splits here again. So we want that to be thicker to thinner to thinner. We always want that tapering down. And then on flat tops, I allow a few goofy things to kind of happen every once in a while, like the way these branches are kind of stacked looking here. But I wanted to show you guys right here, this branch comes up, and then the same thickness kind of stays in that branch there. And what I want to do is I want to reduce the actual size of that. So since this is coming up, I actually have an opportunity to go into a thinner piece. So this goes here, it's slightly smaller and then slightly smaller. So I'll actually get rid of that and build that branch down and taper it down. And now it kind of helps scale everything for this part of the tree. Because in theory as well, all the branches up here should not exceed the branch thicknesses of the lower parts of the tree. Whereas with flat top styles like this, it's a little harder to do that because the way we build the canopy into kind of like this reverse triangle shape, proportions are sometimes thrown out the windows for certain perspectives of flat tops. This right here is a really great example of, like, we get up into the top of the tree and the base of this branch starts back here. It actually runs off of our main trunk line coming up into the tree. And we come up here and we keep going, and then we get to here where it's knuckled. Because this is the top of the tree, the branches grow a lot faster. The shoots on these trees grow a lot faster, and they start to swell. So I'll actually go in and cut that off and kind of whittle it down a little bit and clean that up. And it's in the top of the tree, so that will probably heal pretty fast up there, to be honest. I'm just kind of going through and making some quick prunes up here in the top of the tree. I'm trying to make sure that everything, like here's a great example here. See that little branch here, it kind of crooks back on itself. That's not gonna work. I need the top of my tree to end here. Like Guy Guidry says, end of the story. We need to end the tree at the top there. We can't have the tree continue to build awkward lines. Like even this is a little high for me. I'll go ahead and remove that. And that. I'm always trying to compress bald cypresses because they grow so fast. It's challenging to keep them in check. Let's see, and then nip that back. And you see me cut those straight pieces, and then in favor of going a different angle. That's how we get these different angle changes in all these branches. Like it's right here, you can see it. With no wire, I was able to cut here, here, and here, and then come out to these, and then make that a nice little mature branch piece there. And that nub there, there's a nub right there. This is the fun part, is cleaning up the nubs and going in. And this is in a weird spot, so this is actually going to go away. So we have to actually minimize the amount of branches up top, especially on bald cypresses, because they regenerate those branches, or generate something for the tree nerds out there. Trees don't regenerate, they generate new branches. And so they will generate new branches for us next year and replace anything that I cut hard back up here. Okay. So just kind of going through and making a few adjustments to the canopy. As y'all can see, we can see through this tree fairly well now as far as the way the branches are laid out. So you can actually see the sections through the canopy. And so one of the things that John Naka said is that you want the branches to be so open that a bird could fly through them, is kind of the thought, to kind of simplify things in people's minds when they're trimming their trees. So in the future, this tree should have a pad here, here, there should be a gap here, some padding going on in the back. And then this has a nice build down. So this has a pad here, 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 and then up in here. And so that's how you kind of build that out. And then this guy, this little branch here will kind of act like its own separate little tree shape over here. So a tree on top of a tree kind of look. And so I left one branch on here unwired. I say unwired because I'm going to wire it. It's the only branch that I saw that I was like, I need this to help me build right here. Everything else is kind of pretty nice. I don't really need to overwire this tree, except for every once in a while I'll catch something that's out of line. But I'm gonna put a piece of wire on this and then ever so slightly move that. It seems silly to move one thing, but sometimes I just see something in a tree where I'm like, I just need that one branch there and that's it. I don't really feel like I need to do a crazy amount of work on that, because this tree's had a lot of its branches wired already. In fact, the entirety of this tree was wired completely, and then all the branches were, the wire was taken off and all the branches are just left to their own devices now. And that's how we start getting a more mature look to them. And it takes a little while for that bark to grow on the branches like you see that it has now. So I'm gonna come in and I'm going to actually wire this branch. Like, I'm gonna use this other branch down here. Actually, we're gonna redo that. There we go. That's a much better approach. We're gonna use this as our anchor. So it's just got somewhere to go. And then I'm gonna put a piece of wire on there. And now that I've got full control, I can actually move that one a little bit. I think I like that natural drop that it had. So now that I've got full control, I actually almost put it into the position I was imagining, but I just want to match the movement of the other branches that I've put in before. So I want to get that little bit of a slight wiggle to the branch and come off at a pleasing angle off of the main branch and kind of build that pad right there. And that's it. That's really, there was all to cleaning up a tree like this. So this also goes for deciduous trees. So we'll have to do one on conifers. When it comes to deciduous trees, this is the time to go in and take all the leaves off, clean the tree up, look for things like deadwood features, roots, go in and look at all the branches, check and make sure your branches are alive. That was something I found. I did find some dead branches in here. Found some partially dead branches because of pruning tends to do that to these trees. But overall, we just look for a reset. The fall season is a good time to reset all of our branch structure and set us up for next year, because this is actually called setting the buds. So when we set the buds, that means that we're setting up the branches for the buds to pop in those areas that we're designating for them to be at. So like, I can even shorten this a little bit, but so shortening these branches here, for instance, tells this tree that I don't want it to grow here. I might want it to back bud a little bit here, but mostly I want the energy to be in the ends of these branches that I left unpruned. So as long as I keep those intact, bald cypresses, I know them as well, their growth habit is to grow on the extremities of their branch structure like that. So when we get into the fall, past the fall into winter here, this tree will be watered the same way. You know, we're keeping it nice and wet. We don't need to fertilize as heavy. Actually, we're going to switch over to organic fertilizer. Refer back to the fertilizer video from before. And so we slow everything down and keep the tree happy in its dormancy. And even though it's asleep, the root system is very, very active. So the roots are actually actively growing inside the container right now, because all that energy and all the chemicals and the nutrients and all the stuff that happened up here is now down here. And these roots on these trees will actually swell and get bigger over time in dormancy. I've seen it happen. And then they're going to get ready for repotting in the springtime. We're going to go outside and visit another tree that was in one of our previous videos. We had footage of it before. Me and Nate Murray actually recorded a repotting process on it, and then he lost the footage. So unfortunately, we don't have that. But we do have some other big bald cypress repots coming up in the near future to show you guys the process of that. So we're gonna go visit that tree outside and let this guy rest and put him back on the bench. So this is the tree from earlier bald cypress video that I shot. There's some of the, there you go. There's some cut paste right there from 4 years ago. But yeah, this is the tree from my earliest bald cypress styling videos that I did. I think it was Bald Cypress Part 2. I think this was one. This one had a lot of views. So if you go back and look at my videos, this thing was like a twig at the top. So we had a little, we had a stump here basically, and we had a twig just sticking out the top, and that grew into this. And like I said, me and Nate Murray repotted this tree into this nice shallow container. I like bald cypresses in shallow, long containers, especially when they're really tall like this. But yeah, this is a really cool flat top, and I just did a little bit of pruning, and it still has the wire on it from whenever I styled it when it went in this container. So, but yeah, that's a great example there. And there's a follow-up to one of those earlier videos that you guys were asking for. So, yeah. That looks pretty good. I'm happy with this tree now. It looks really happy out here with the other bonsai in our little garden area that we have set up. It is raining out here. This is the rainy season. We get into fall and winter, and it tends to rain a whole lot. And then it'll slack off in the wintertime, and we'll get nice chilly temperatures. In southeast Louisiana, it's gonna get down to maybe the mid-30s. We had 17 degrees here, the absolute coldest day, but it was one day out of the entire year. So it doesn't stay very, very cold here. I mean, we get to 32 degrees, maybe 30 most nights of the winter, and then we're good. So other than that, going into the winter, I would drop the trees on the ground if we get a really hard freeze. So this guy will probably go just directly on the ground in front of this bench. And if it's extreme cold, like it got down, for extreme to us is like 17 degrees here. So some of these trees might even be put into the greenhouse for further root protection. I think other than that, this is pretty good. So we'll have to move on to a conifer for our next video. When I say conifer, I'm referring to a juniper, a pine tree, or some other species that keeps its leaves all year long, like this juniper here, for instance, Procummins sitting here. So, but if you guys enjoyed this video, please like, follow, share, subscribe to our channel, and go in and leave comments. Comments really, really help. And they also help me kind of look for what you guys want to learn. If you guys want to talk more bonsai about bald cypress, about, you know, tropicals, or any of the conifers here that we can grow. We have things like buttonwoods, and we have red maples, and we have Protocarpus mycophilus, and we have big Japanese boxwoods and stuff we could talk about as well. If there's species you guys are looking for, just let me know in the comments and we can definitely cover that. But thank you guys for watching, and y'all have a great day, and I'll see you on the next one.